Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us today. I hope that you found the conversation with Walid and Sarah insightful. I hope that some of your questions have been answered through that recording, but we do have some time for live Q&A to answer some of the questions that have come through the chat. So I am going to start this and we will going. Just make sure that's okay. So we received hundreds of questions in the chat. Okay, so I hope you can appreciate we won't be able to get to every single one, but we really are just so excited about the engagement of this community, and thank you so much for being here and putting in your questions, and we will really try to address as many as possible. We're going to focus on the most common questions. And so I think it makes sense to start with, there were a lot of questions about the drug itself and the nature of the trial. So I'll try to address some of those, and then I'm going to hand it over to Marianne and Allison, and they can talk a little bit more about where and when it might become available and things about the cost and other things to think about. So let's just start a little bit about the drug and the trial. So just to reiterate, AMT-130 is this piece of genetic material packaged into a harmless virus and delivered to the part of the brain that's affected by HD, and this is done by brain surgery. And so these genetic instructions interfere with the production of the Huntington protein. So less of it is made, and that is what we call a Huntington lowering approach. Now, once those genetic instructions are delivered, they stay in the brain forever. So this is an irreversible procedure. And just to recap these latest results, in 12 people who received the high dose of the drug, after 3 years, uniQure has reported a 75% slowing of disease. And so we got some questions about what that means exactly, how that was measured. So this was measured using the CUHDRS, which is a composite score. It takes into account a number of things, including total functional capacity. So things like having trouble working, doing finances, chores at home, day-to-day living. It also looks at total motor score, which is problems with movement. And there are some cognitive tests to look at problems with thinking. So hopefully that answers that question. There were some questions in the chat about the other 5 people who received the high dose, because there were 17 and now 12 are at this 3-year endpoint. I don't have the details for those 5 individuals, but it may just be that they haven't reached the 3-year mark yet, and we'll be getting another data set at the next release. Maybe we'll see the data from those individuals. Another question is about several questions about the anticipated outcomes and whether this drug will slow disease progression. And so AMT-130 and other Huntington lowering approaches, they're all meant to slow disease progression. And I thought this might be a good opportunity to talk about the difference between a cure and a disease-modifying treatment. So a cure would completely stop or even reverse a disease. On the other hand, a disease-modifying therapy aims to slow or delay disease progression, and that, helping people maintain their abilities and their quality of life for longer. And so AMT-130, if it's successful, would fall into this second category of disease-modifying therapy. There were some questions about side effects and adverse reactions. I know Walid covered it, but just to reiterate, so far it has been safe. There were some adverse reactions, and early on they actually had to pause the trial temporarily because a few people experienced some serious side effects, but they have since recovered and the trial was resumed. And since then, there have been no new drug-related serious adverse events since 2022. So that's good news. Several questions about, is there any other way to deliver the drug? Is there other ways to get past the blood-brain barrier? Will this be available in a pill form? So AMT-130, as I said, and as Sarah mentioned, it's one of several Huntington lowering approaches. And while AMT-130 is a gene therapy, and gene therapies of this type require brain surgery, but there are several companies working on other approaches to reduce Huntington. Some of these will be in pill form, and some of them are delivered by a spinal tap or lumbar puncture. And so several of these are actually being tested in clinical trials right now. So although, you know, AMT-130 may be the one that you've heard most because it was covered most by the media, there are other options coming down the pipeline. And so, you know, uniQure, as Sarah said, is good. The uniQure news is good news for all Huntington lowering approaches. We got many questions about what stage the trial participants were and whether AMT-130 will be available for people at other stages and or beneficial for people at all stages of disease. And I think both Walid and Sarah touched on this, but just by the sheer number of times it came up in the chat, I thought I would reiterate. Excuse me. So far, the therapy has only been tested in people with early symptoms of HD. So they mentioned late stage 2 and early stage 3. So when they say that, they're talking about the HDSA staging system. What that means, you know, in real life is that these folks have measurable symptoms, movement, thinking, and function symptoms, but their day-to-day function is still largely intact and they are, you know, still independent. So that's the folks who were in the trial so far. If the FDA approves this drug, the eligibility will likely at first be for people that are similar to those individuals that were in the trial. Over time, further studies will explore, you know, the drug in other people at different stages, maybe later stages, maybe pre-symptomatic stages. But it's not until those tests are done that we will really have an idea of who will benefit from the drug and what stage. And it's just really too early to tell right now. Okay, so I'll do one more question about sort of the nature of the drug, and then I'll hand it over to Marianne. So a few people asked about the CAG number and would the CAG number affect like how well this drug is working? This drug does not discriminate between different CAG lengths. So this one I wanted to bring up because it actually also touches on another question that came up a lot, which is how important is it to preserve the normal version of the Huntington protein? And so quick recap, we all have 2 copies of the Huntington gene, one inherited from mom, one from dad. Most people with HD have one normal copy of the Huntington gene and one expanded copy with the extra CAGs. And so the normal copy produces normal Huntington protein, which has, you know, various responsibilities in our cells, and we wouldn't necessarily want to get rid of it altogether. You know, this was a very important question back before we had so many clinical trials testing Huntington lowering in people. But so far, thankfully, in several ongoing trials that have reduced both copies of the Huntington protein. They've been safe so far. And so it argues that you can lower both copies safely, at least on the scale of a few years. Having said that, other companies like Wave and Vico are actually going after just lowering or preferentially lowering the expanded copy. And so more options are coming down the pipeline. So that kind of, I think, covers the most common questions about the drug itself and the trials and who's eligible. By far, the next biggest question was about where and when the drug will be available. I think that would probably sum that up, right, Marianne? So I'm going to hand it over to Marianne to talk about that.
Yeah, so a lot of questions that have been coming into the chat, but also when everybody registered, thank you for submitting your questions, and also just like through the community to us at national and I'm sure on local levels have been like access. Like, can I access this drug right now? Can I go to my local neurologist? And the answer is no, right? There's no enrollment right now for the current clinical trial. They're fully enrolled. They have another cohort that they are going to do the procedure on, the surgery on, and that is fully enrolled as well. In best case scenario, uniQure is planning to meet with FDA in early 2026. So best case scenario, everything goes well. FDA is like, yes, we want this as an accelerated approval process, which an accelerated approval process is when the FDA's process is patients with certain serious illnesses they're showing new treatments that show promising early data and they show benefit. So while the longer term clinical trials will continue to show safety and effectiveness, they will approve it for that within that initial data. So if that goes through, FDA is like, yes, go forth with it. The earliest that it would be potentially an option would be probably end of 2026, early 2027. So that's sort of when. Where this is a significant 12-hour brain surgery, and only certain places in the United States that I'm aware of have this special MRI machine that allow the team of specialists that work together with the neurosurgeon to provide this surgery will also work with a team at like an HDSA center of excellence, because there will need to be aftercare and follow up afterwards for a long period of time to make sure everything is safe and effective. So that will mean that people are going to have to travel potentially if there's not a site close by. Will this be potentially available in the future at other sites or will other universities or institutions have these machines or will be able to work further? That's something that we don't have the answers to just yet. And
Thanks, Marianne.
Yeah.
I think that sums it up nicely. Like Walid and Sarah, they're very excited, and they talked about this being, I think Walid mentioned it being similar to deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's. I don't know that if that's the case. I don't know what the how many places you can get deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's. But the fact is, it's a significant procedure. I'm hopeful that if the data continues to be positive, we'll make it happen. We want to get this drug out to as many people as possible, but we got to stay realistic. Another huge hurdle and another very frequent question in the chat was about the cost of these drugs. Allison, did you want to touch on that?
Yeah, and before I talk about cost, this question came up a lot too. Is the current government shutdown going to impact the FDA process? And if uniQure isn't submitting their proposals until 2026, Probably not. But the reality is because the government is currently shut down, any applications that were going to be submitted now are going to get delayed. And so it could cause a little bit of a backlog. That doesn't mean it's going to like wildly slow anything down, but things are currently shut down. The FDA cannot review new drug applications while they are shut down. And so it could likely delay everything. And well, we cannot speak on behalf of the FDA. We can talk about generalizations, how things normally operate, but the reality is there are going to be implications from the government being shut down. There has been a reduced workforce, and I know uniQure is going to do everything they can to work with all of the FDA's rules and regulations, which are a lot. It is a large federal organization, but to do things above board and correctly, it all does take time. But that's why we're hoping end of 2026 is a very realistic goal. And then regarding costs, cost is really hard to predict at this time because there isn't anything on the market for Huntington's disease. What we can go off of is other disease modifying drugs, other gene therapies that have been approved by the FDA. At this time, similar drugs cost between $2 and $4 million. The most, like one of the most similar drugs, another brain injection, is on the higher end. It's a $4 million procedure. So we can kind of get an idea from that. It's hard to know exact costs because we don't speak for the insurance companies. Will the insurance companies likely provide some coverage? Yes. But even if it's 20% of a $4 million procedures, that's still a lot of money out of pocket. Medicare does cover some of these things, but again, that's going to be a whole nother conversation. Once something like this is approved, once it's released to market, then Medicare is going to have a whole oh my God, negotiation. There's pricing negotiations that happen every year. So all of this is ongoing. All of this is really new. And a lot of the disease modifying therapies and gene therapies that have come out for other conditions, those are also really relatively new, like within the last 5 years. So this is something we're all dealing with. This is new for everyone. This is new for the United States. And when we're answering these questions, we're talking about it from the perspective of the United States. I cannot speak to cost in other places because that is not something that we are aware of. And it's brand new. Things when they are brand new are always more expensive. It's always most expensive when something is first released. And that is something that we do have to look at. And we are not the only players in this game. This is something Medicare has to look at. This is something drug companies have to look at. This is something that the health insurance companies have to look at. This is something that like the institutions that are providing this surgery have to look at. Because again, those are very specialized medical institutions. There are only so many across the country that can do this. And so all of these things get factored into cost. And it's impossible for us to predict right now. But is it something that is going to be easily accessible to everyone immediately when it is released? Unfortunately, the answer to that is no. And it is something we are going to have to continue working on and getting questions and getting more information because we just don't have enough information about all of these particular things at this time. And then another question that did come up, and Sarah did actually address this, is should I go out and get tested for HD right now? And I loved Sarah's answer. Sarah's answer was fantastic. She said no. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. And the reason for that, so as the senior manager of disability programs, I see the legal complexities of all of this. And as of right now, there isn't enough of a cost benefit analysis. Because with genetic testing, if you do test positive for Huntington's disease, you can be legally discriminated against in terms of insurance, in terms of certain aspects of employment, like you can fight it, but discrimination does happen. And this is also a good thing to bring up because there are people who consider doing anonymous testing. In light of all of these clinical trials of AMT-1, like the benefits of AMT-130, getting anonymous testing isn't enough of a benefit anymore. So if you are seriously considering getting genetic testing done, it is better to do it on the record. But it's also really important to have the relevant conversations, understand what things could be impacted or changed. So can we say you're 22 years old, you want to just go out and get tested? We're not at that point. Sarah said we are not at that point. It is still a conversation that needs to be had. But as she said, as we move forward, as more drugs come to market, as there are more clinical trials, we get more results about everything, then that conversation is going to change. But we are not at that point yet where everyone should go out and get tested. It's important to have these conversations.
Thanks, Allison. Okay, so a lot of people are feeling, okay, if I can't go get tested and I can't get into the trial and I can't do anything right now, but like, what can I do? And so, Marianne, did you want to maybe talk a little bit about um, kind of, best course of action right
Yeah,
now?
absolutely. So we have actually a slide here, and this is just some of the organizations, advocacy support organizations as well that, reach out to, find support, talk about this. I know for myself, I'm on a roller coaster ride of emotions, and I'm cautiously optimistic. I know so many people I love, this isn't going to help. But I do know that this could be potentially an option for so many people I do love as well. So I'm really, really hopeful, but I'm cautious and I'm reaching out to my support networks. And I think that's really important to know, like, that there are people to talk to, there are places to go to talk to others and professionals as well. I would say that the most important thing is starting to establish care. Dr. Waleed and Dr. Sarah talked about Enroll HD, which was how they um, the placebo participants that they received that information from. Enroll HD, participate, enroll. That's a way to also get into an HDSA Center of Excellence or an HD clinic, wherever you are, and to start establishing that baseline care and that conversation to start saying that you're interested in potentially, joining a clinical trial, and asking questions around it. Also, making sure that you sign up for HD Trial Finder. That way you're up to date with things that are potentially going on along with clinicaltrials.gov. And of course, myself, Tam, and Allison, our emails are up here. And we want you to know you could reach out to us with any questions.
And I do want to add on to that. I know Marianne definitely meant, like, she stressed going to get the appropriate care, and we really cannot stress that enough. Because with something like AMT-130, you can't just go to your primary care physician and necessarily get connected to the right individuals. HD is a rare condition that does require specialized treatment. So it is important to find the care team that works for you. That needs to include a neurologist. And it is really important to know, like, I am not a clinician, but I have read thousands upon thousands of pages of medical records in my time. You see things, you learn things. Like, not all neurologists are created equal, and that's not to be offensive to neurologists. There are sleep study neurologists. You don't want to go to a sleep study neurologist if you have Huntington's disease. That's not at all appropriate. There's movement disorder neurologists who specify or who study movement specifically. And yes, HD is considered a movement condition, but there's also the behavioral cognitive components of it. So you want to make sure you're getting the care that is reflective of all of these things. If you're seeing a movement disorder neurologist, but they're not treating your behavioral or cognitive care, then you're not getting all the care. And we understand that not everyone can go to an HDSA Center of Excellence because they're not all conveniently located. But that doesn't mean that there aren't neurologists closer to you that can provide wonderful care. The Center of Excellence neurologists are, in my experience, have been happy to work with other neurologists to provide comprehensive care, and there's no one saying you can't have multiple neurologists. A close one that you see more locally who can manage um, prescriptions, your drug treatment, like things on a more day-to-day basis, and then maybe seeing a more specialized neurologist once a year. But so many of these things work together. We're not supposed to stand alone. This is supposed to be a collaborative thing. And the more we all work together, the more that's beneficial for the things coming down the pipeline, figuring out what the next steps are for all of us. And I know we can't give concrete answers about everything because the reality is we don't know some of these answers right now, but we can't get there without your support and everybody continuing to work together and do all these fun things.
Well put, Allison. So I think that would be a nice way to conclude. I'd like to thank Dr. Walid Abisab and Dr. Sarah Tabrizi. Thanks so much for their insights. Thank all of you for tuning in and sending your questions. We know we didn't get to all of the questions. There were about 1,000 people on the call, and it just wasn't possible. But we have received them. We will try to get answers out to people, and please feel free, as Marianne said, to send any questions to these email addresses listed. And don't forget to lean on your other advocacy organizations and other research and education organizations, and the many resources available through the HDSA website. So thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.